today what we're talking about is the ability to use Greenshades Payroll with Sage Intacct. And so what we're focused on today primarily is going to be those general ledger accounts that are going to be flowing from Sage into Greenshades and those dimensions, so that we can ultimately be positioned to where, as you're processing payroll, all of your various departments and locations, et cetera, are going to be mapped to your respective general ledger accounts. And so that as we're going through that payroll process and we're getting those employees paid, all of that time that ultimately can feed into payroll, all of that can be allocated correctly on the back end to go back into Sage with those general ledger batches and creating those journal entries. So I've got some screenshots that we can touch on a little bit, and I'll dive into this in a little bit more detail. But big picture, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about simplifying the process of getting that GL data up to Greenshades so that we can understand, what those needs are and be able to allocate all those expenses back to the respective accounts. All right, so what I'll do here, I'm going to jump in as well and do kind of a live demonstration while we're going through this. And again, just to step back, don't want to get too into the weeds on the setup and all of that, because it's not the most exciting, most exciting things ever, but certainly want to be able to address any questions that anybody has. But as we're in this environment here, in this case with the screenshot right here, we're looking inside of Sage and we're seeing all of our accounts that are set up within Sage. And quite simply, when we come in to set up Greenshades, it's really just a matter of kind of creating that data source and being able to import all of those general ledger accounts. Now, there's other ways to pull in the data. Certainly, you can import data. That's perfectly fine. But our main objective is to make it as easy as possible and to automate it and obviously reduce any inaccuracies. So pulling that data directly from Sage is going to be the best bet for us on that. All right, so let me go ahead and switch over to Greenshades Online. This is the Greenshades Online portal where we can manage really everything within payroll and HR. So this is where we'll come in to view all of our time and attendance data, all of our benefits and ACA details, all of our tax information, of course, our employee population, and then ultimately this is where we'll also come to process payroll. So before we jump in and actually go through and take a look at the process of running payroll, just to kind of simplify what this looks like here, let me go ahead and pull up this mapping screen. So when we come in and we're setting up a new instance for Sage, when we want to pull that data into Greenshades Online, it's very straightforward. So we're going to name the data source whatever we want, and then that data source type, we're going to have this drop down right here. So you can see we're going to specify Sage Intacct. Obviously, we're listed in the marketplace. We have the relevant information that we're going to need in order to extract that data from Sage directly. So really straightforward. Of course, our team walks you through this process, but we'll set up this data source and then get the ball rolling for you, pulling all of those accounts, and then from there, it's just going to continue on quite easily using Greenshades for processing your payroll, and I'll show you what that looks like. So in terms of setup, really straightforward, something you're only going to do one time. Obviously, in the future, if you add on an additional database or something like that, or you make some changes to your environment, of course, we can come in here and make these adjustments. This is all exposed on the front end, but of course, our support team will be here to assist with that process as well. And of course, just for the sake of kind of the broad audience that we have on the group today, I'm not going in super detailed on any of these steps, but absolutely, if you want to kind of take a deeper dive, maybe do a personalized demo and talk through this more, by all means, we can absolutely work with you to get that set up. All right, so hop back here to the homepage on Greenshades Online. So I was talking earlier about kind of that hire to retire flow when we're thinking about getting an employee paid. Again, right now we're primarily concentrated on the actual act of payroll processing, and I think what goes hand in hand with that, of course, is the time and attendance tracking, actually tracking all of the wage and hour information for our employees, so that ultimately we can get those employees paid. So you can see we can come out here at any point. We can take a look at all of our employees within our employee base. A lot of high-level reporting that we can do, high-level KPIs that can be monitored through the homepage there, and then we have a full reporting dashboard that we can access at any point. So of course, build out any kind of reports that we're needing to. But all this information is available, at our fingertips at any point for us to come in and check out. And you can see if I pull up an employee record, just to kind of have this as sort of our foundation, right? This is our employee profile. This is where kind of a centralized spot to go for any particular employee to find all relevant information about that employee. You can see we have the organizational chart here. This is going to be used for kind of building out that overall, especially with kind of approval workflows. When we're thinking about that supervisor and subordinate relationship, we can build out those organizational charts so that way you have the opportunity to expose a limited amount of information to your managers. And I say limited, ultimately it's at your discretion. You can kind of pick and choose what information you want to make available to your managers, but it's an opportunity to take away some of the manual tedious tasks on maybe the payroll and HR professionals when it comes to approving time cards or approving time off requests, or even approving other things like address changes and things of that sort. If you want to kind of put that power in your manager's hands to be able to approve those change requests, by all means you can do that. You're always going to have ultimate oversight and visibility, so you can see every action that a manager's taking. So it's a good opportunity to, again, get some assistance with managing those employees on a day-to-day basis, while still also, again, maintaining that control and visibility that certainly is important to you as the employer, and oftentimes as the person that's ultimately responsible for all these things. But then beyond that, just being able to come in here and we can see at any point, we can scroll down, we can see all of our employees' evaluations and any kind of certifications that they have on file. So if there's any maybe depending on what kind of job they have, maybe there's a particular license that an employee needs to have. We have a full certification dashboard where you can manage all of that and you can view all of that. So any kind of expiring certifications, all that can be tracked through Greenshades. Automatic notifications can be sent out for reminders and upcoming expirations. There's a whole lot that we could focus on just on the certification side. I'm kind of just glossing over it today. However, that's absolutely something that you can manage through Greenshades as well. So you can see there's a lot of different things, and part of that are the timesheets. So again, if we're thinking about that hire to retire, there's a lot on the onboarding side that we can be collecting from our employees. But once we have that employee onboarded and we have them set up in the system and they're going through and working on their day-to-day process, they'll have the ability, depending on what you expose to them, to be able to come into the system and work on their time cards, for example. So any salaried employees that you have, if they're just trying to, maybe for allocation purposes, you're wanting to track the time, but it's not actually going to impact their pay rate. Maybe they're just paid a flat amount every pay period regardless. That's totally fine. You can really use timesheets just for tracking that time, again, for allocation purposes. Or if you have hourly employees, of course, obviously you can use the time and attendance module through Greenshades for tracking their time as well. Beyond that, especially when we get into hourly employees, there's a number of different methods that we have for collecting that time from the employee. When I don't want to jump around too much, but when I jump over here to the employee portal, again, just to kind of reset where I was on the employer side, taking a look at everything. And now, well, I'm not sure what happened right there. Let me just jump back in here and I'll log back into to the system here real quick. And then we could take a look at that. But when we're on the employer side, obviously we have visibility to everybody in the organization. But one of the nice things about the employee portal, which some of you may be using already today if you're an existing Greenshades customer, is the ability to expose this information to the employees. So again, trying to, just like with the manager, we're trying to put the power in the employee's hands, give them visibility so they have confidence in the data and confidence in their paycheck, for example, when they can kind of see what made up that paycheck, why they got paid a certain dollar amount, what their time cards looked like. There's visibility that's really critical there. But then also anything that you can do to help cut down on the amount of work, manual work that's either having to go to the managers or even to the payroll and HR professionals. So it could be something as simple as an employee submitting a qualifying life event when they need to make a change to their benefits. I can say personally, firsthand, that both of my kids, when they were born, literally, like I mentioned, been in Greenshades for a number of years now. Literally at the hospital, I submitted a qualifying life event once from my laptop, and then the second time around from my phone. But we did the qualifying life event for benefits right through the employee platform, right from the hospital, and that of course flowed directly to our payroll and HR team, which they approved it, and then obviously it updated the insurance and added that new dependent to my account. And so it's a good opportunity to, again, give that employee some empowerment to allow them to make some of those changes on their own, but then at the same time giving them that visibility for access to the information and giving them confidence in that data. So when I pulled up a time card just a moment ago on the employer side, it looked pretty similar to this. And so with our employees, if you want to have your employees tracking their time within Greenshades, you can use the web method like we're doing right here, where really we're just coming in and saying, hey, I worked some number of hours today. Of course, all their time can be tied back to a specific code. It can be tied back to their department structure, the work location structure, position structure. We can also have kind of custom fields that we've dropped in here. So I've got like a project line item right here. So there's a lot of flexibility in this, but this is just one of the entry methods. So depending on, again, the type of employee and what sort of profile you'd want to have for them, maybe they're doing more project-based work and you just want them to come in once a day or maybe even once a week to load in some entries, or it could be someone who, hey, they're more truly an hourly employee, need to be clocking in and clocking out. In that instance, we have a web time clock that's available on the homepage to the employee. We have a mobile app where the employee can clock in and clock out. And then also there's what we refer to as a kiosk, where you can actually just install a time clock software on a local machine. You can use your own hardware, but you can install that software, allow the employee to clock in. And that's really popular in maybe, first thing comes to mind is like a warehouse environment, but really any kind of environment, it would be suitable where the employees are really just kind of lining up with the time clock, clocking in back to back, and you don't want the employee to actually log into the full employee portal. It's a way to expose just the time clock component in a shared space. The employee can walk in, put in their PIN, clock in, and then as soon as they clock in, it just goes back to the login page again. So it's a quick and easy way to collect time for your employees. Again, depending on what type of environment your workers are in. And of course, I'll just mention too that if for whatever reason you're not tracking time through Greenshades, that's perfectly acceptable as well. So if you are using a different time and attendance partner, and really what you're wanting to do is to be able to import that data into Greenshades so that then the payroll processing can happen within Greenshades, we can absolutely support that. We have a variety of different methods for importing that time. So we can certainly work through that with you and kind of let you know what those options are, but there's again a lot of flexibility around that, including more kind of API-based integration if you're looking to actually develop something, especially depending on what kind of volume you're dealing with. If you have a large number of employees and a lot of complexity there, maybe you'd prefer just to have that data feed directly in and not have to worry about any kind of import step or anything like that. Okay, so but yeah, that's just kind of a general overview on how that works there. So again, all those specifically when I'm thinking about like departments and again the positions and work locations, all that data is compiled within Greenshades. So when we're going through the setup process, there's a number of different ways for kind of pulling that data into Greenshades. So that whole company structure is then created, and then depending on what access the employee has and what they should be eligible for, all of their relevant positions will show up there, and that way the employee can associate their time. And then with that all in mind, all that data from that time card, or if this is imported through a CSV or something like that, it will work the same way. All of those allocations flow directly into the pay run. And so as we're creating the pay run for these employees, you might have one employee that might have 5 or 6 different transactions on the same pay run, because they might have 12 hours that they were paid under a particular department. They've got 14 hours under a different department, maybe a handful of hours where they had a different position. And there can be kind of a combination of different things that are leading into that, but all of that is split out on that pay run so that ultimately you can have it for your own reporting purposes, both to report off through the platform directly, but then also from that general ledger standpoint to be able to update those respective accounts back in Sage. Okay, so before I jump into the pay run and kind of walk through that process again without getting too in the weeds on the setup, just for a little bit of perspective here. I keep talking about, kind of opened up by saying, okay, we have these, of course, these general ledger accounts that exist in Sage. Assuming you're using Sage today, of course, this works, similarly with other accounting systems as well. But Sage is who we're talking about today, and we were really excited about participating not too long ago in the annual conference. Had a lot of really good conversations. So excited about having this conversation today. So once those accounts have been imported in, once they're within Greenshades, then on a kind of a per code basis or per category, we have earning codes, benefit codes, deduction codes, garnishments, taxes. All of this can be structured in here with a variety of different splits that we can set up, and we can literally have the opportunity to simply come in here and map everything out, right? So we can say, okay, if we have this kind of code and this department combination and this, earning group or whatever that might look like, we can have that all feedback to various, various debit accounts. So this is something that, again, along with that, I mentioned that customer service, one of our differentiators, our support team, our implementations team that's working with you directly on this setup, they'll guide you through this process and talk through this. And again, there's a variety of ways to kind of assist with this mapping to help automate it. But I talked earlier about the visibility and kind of transparency that we like to show with employees to say, hey, here's your full pay stub and here's your time card and here's where everything came from, to help them kind of understand what's contributing to their pay. And the same thing, the same kind of mindset exists here on the employer side. Obviously on the pay side, you can see all those details, but even something like this with the general ledger, even if the mapping initially was done kind of behind the scenes and imported into the system, we have the ability to come in here, view all this at any point, and of course tweak it, edit it if we need to do that. All right, so I'm gonna hop back out of that and I will come back over here into Payroll. And then once we, kind of go through this payroll process, I'll jump back to the employee portal one more time just to show you what it looks like to the employee, because I've talked a lot about the kind of visibility and transparency that exists there throughout the onboarding process and the time and attendance process. But likewise, once the employee gets paid, we want to have that full visibility there for that employee to come in and access at any point. Okay, so as we are here looking at the payroll dashboard, again, we're back on the employer side. So we've talked big picture, onboarding new hires. We talked about time collection, and I didn't even jump into it on the employer side, but there's a full opportunity, full-time timesheet review center where you have the opportunity to review all of these time cards for the employees. Again, you might have the manager be the one that's actually approving those time cards or making edits to those time cards, but you still have full visibility and control, and you can kind of dictate whether or not that time card is going to be included on the pay run. So you can see all of that before you ever even come in here to the payroll dashboard. But once we come in here to the payroll dashboard, a couple different things that might happen when we're coming out here, right? You may be coming out here to run payroll, which is pretty common, and that's why when we first come in here, we're going to see our upcoming pay runs right here. So to really help automate things and kind of simplify things as much as possible, we have this concept of payroll schedules that are set up, and you can have as many different payroll schedules as you need. But effectively, essentially what those are is that you can set up, what's the pay frequency and all sorts of different rules around which employees are included in what schedule and what the holiday schedules look like and everything like that. So that once those are configured, those employees are automatically loaded into that pay run every period. And so the idea is that we can come out here and it's going to be telling us, hey, it's time to run payroll, right? So in this case, we have some pay periods that are coming up here that we can go ahead and run our payroll for, but we also have access to all of our historical pay run information in here. We can come in here and make adjustments to any historical pay stub. So if we needed to maybe just void a check and reissue a check, we can do that. But if we needed to make an adjustment to an entire pay run, maybe we underpaid some employees or overpaid some employees, there was something additional that we didn't know needed to be factored in as the payroll processor, and we found out a week too late or something like that. Those things happen sometimes, and so there's a really easy workflow to come in here and make those payroll adjustments that we're really excited about. That was rolled out based on feedback, so we made some adjustments to that. tweaks to that process and rolled out a new workflow not too long ago, and we're getting some really good feedback around that. Also from a kind of a hypothetical standpoint, as we're coming in here and we're thinking about, again, processing payroll for our employees, you also have the opportunity to leverage some of these calculators that we have in here. So we have the what if calculator and the gross up calculator. So essentially these scenarios where maybe the employee might have some kind of change, or we want to see some hypothetical scenarios on, okay, if we made this pay rate change to them, or we adjusted this deduction or this work location, what impact would that have on the employee's paycheck? And so we can kind of create those parameters, and then basically it creates a mock pay stub and would say, hey, if you ran payroll under these conditions, this is what it would look like. So it's a nice opportunity to again run through some hypothetical scenarios without ever actually touching any of the data directly. You don't have to kick off on a pay run, make a change, and then roll it back or anything like that. But you get the same end result with a lot less work and risk of error. And then of course, the other side of it, we have the gross up calculator, so that in a situation where maybe bonuses most regularly, but if we say, hey, we've guaranteed somebody a $500 bonus, this is what we want them to be taking home. We're saying they're going to take home $500. Okay, well, what does that gross pay need to look like in order for that employee to end up with a net of $500? And so we can run that gross up calculator, select which employee we're dealing with. Of course, it's pulling in all that data. This isn't like a calculator that you're just using online where you're kind of supplying all the own information. It's pulling in all that information from the employee record. So you can just say, hey, here's what I want the end dollar amount to be. Here's the deductions that I want to be included or excluded, whatever it might be. And then it's going to tell you exactly what that employee needs to be paid, and you can feed that directly into the pay run. So it makes it really easy to kind of run through those scenarios. All right, so with that background, let me jump in here and start a pay run just to talk through and kind of walk through what this process looks like. Okay, so we are in a pay run now. So again, this is where we would come when it's time to process payroll. In this situation, this is a specific group of employees that are in this pay schedule. Pay schedule weekly group B is the name of this one. Of course, you can have as many as you need and you can name them whenever you want. But all of these employees are going to be preloaded in here. If we needed to add an employee manually, we need to manually add an employee, we can do that right here. I didn't even mention it a moment ago on that payroll dashboard, but if we ever need to do just a one-off payroll, maybe for a bonus check or maybe a termination pay, something like that, where you want to do an off-cycle pay, really easy to do that. You can just bypass this process entirely and just go to run special payroll. It prompts you to enter in which employee you want to pay, what the check date is, what the pay period is, and then boom, then you jump right in here to the pay run, and you can go in and do kind of a concentrated focus on what it is that you're trying to do. So again, that would be primarily used for off-cycle payrolls. But for just our standard payrolls, bi-weekly, weekly, whatever that might be, really straightforward. We're just going to come in here. All of our employees will be loaded in here. And then step 2 is where all of these hours and earnings come into play. So I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the employee's time card, and I was saying how those time cards can be pulled in directly into the pay run. So you can see right here, there's this little refresh timesheets. So again, all of those approved timesheets are going to be pulled in directly into the pay run. All of this will be populated so we can see everything. We can see the earnings and those hours, but of course we can edit any of this information too if we need. So for some reason, if we said, okay, this was actually 45 hours and maybe instead of a $543 bonus or whatever, we say, okay, it actually needs to be $650. We can come in here and make those adjustments per line item, really straightforward, really easy to do that. But we can also adjust from an allocation standpoint. We can adjust their positions, their department, location, and again, all of this is feeding in directly from the time card or whatever that source is for those hours and earnings. I mentioned that we have an API available that you can certainly develop too, but then we also have the opportunity to upload hours and earnings through like a CSV or Excel spreadsheet. And of course, we can manually add hours too. So I mean, if you just have one employee, you need to quickly search for that particular employee, we can come in here, search for that record we're looking for, select the code we want to pay out, and boom, really quickly add them to a pay run. All right, so I'll just keep on moving down here through the payroll cycle. So you'll see here when we get into deductions. Now, one of the things that I always like to remind everybody of, a couple things to note here on deductions. So when we're talking about the Green Employee Portal, which again, I'll just jump out here briefly back to the employee side. So this is the employee side. You can just kind of reset. On the employee portal, employees can enroll in benefits, right? So this is a situation where, okay, we've got open enrollment that's begun, so we can start here. Or again, maybe they had a kid, they need to claim a qualifying life event. They can do this right here and make a benefit change mid-year. But all of these benefits that the employee enrolls in, all of these benefits are going to feed directly into payroll. So we're going to have benefit codes, deduction codes, all that's configured and assigned to the employee already based on all their enrollment history. So by the time we get into the pay run, all of these deductions are going to be loaded in here already. But if we needed to add in any deductions manually, we could do that, right? Manually, or we can upload a file. So different scenarios may call for different things, but if it's a one-time deduction we need to do for some reason, sure, we can just come in here and throw that deduction in here. If I scroll down, you'll also see beyond just our standard percent gross and fixed amount deductions, we have some other deductions down here that are kind of grayed out. And what these are calculated garnishments. And so, in fact, really not long ago, I mentioned that the Sage conference, Sage Intacct conference we were at just a few weeks ago in Orlando, and there were a number of people that we ended up in conversations about related to garnishments, right? They just had a lot of employees that have multiple garnishments, so that's something that many companies struggle with. That's not necessarily uncommon, but it did seem like a very large number of employers. We ended up in conversations about that. So when I talk about compliance and that kind of 20-year track record that we have with that, that includes garnishments, whether it's child support, tax levies, student loans, whatever that might be. Those orders can be entered directly on the employee card. There's a really straightforward wizard that you go through. You're just going to say, okay, what type of order it is, and basically just what information is on the order, right? And then from there, once those are assigned to the employee, we're going to automatically pull those into the pay run and do all of those calculations. And so if, for example, I wanted to take a look at this one particular employee here, I can search for her, and I can see, okay, we've got some different deductions up here, and then also our garnishment deductions. And so what Greenshades is actually doing is, taking the all of the calculations and of course the laws and the rules into consideration. So we're going to be calculating the disposable income for that employee, what the disposable earnings are, what's that pool that we can pull from to be garnished, take out any deductions, especially in related to health insurance for a dependent, for example. If that needs to be excluded first before we calculate out the child support, we'll absolutely account for all of that. But then we're going to factor in the type of garnishment and the number of orders that are already in place to make that determination of which order should take priority and which of those should be prorated and in which instance. So that is something that can be extremely complicated for employers to manage, especially if there's any kind of significant volume there. Even with a low volume, it's such a touchy area because you need to and are required to take that maximum amount that you can to make sure that the folks that need that money are ultimately getting paid. However, you can't overdeduct, right? We got to make sure that employee has a certain amount of funds that are set aside and are protected for them. And so with Greenshades, we're going to do all those calculations for you. So I always like to call that out just again because they do look a little bit different. And if you're taking a look at the employee card, you can kind of see where those garnishments are set up. Similar for benefits, of course, on the employer benefits, right? Whether the employee's enrolled in an insurance plan that has some employer paid amount in there that's of course set up as a benefit, or this is imported or whatever it might be. All of this is going to be visible here and available to you to make adjustments to, tweak it, do whatever you need to do as we're coming through the payroll process. And then as we were talking about deductions a moment ago, some employers are primarily impacted by this just for garnishments. Other employers are impacted more regularly by this, depending on the type of workforce that they have, tipped employees, or kind of overall low earners. So if you have any type of deduction that you choose to track arrears on. You can do that. Just check the box when you're going through the setup process. And then what we will do when we can't take that full deduction amount, we'll put it into an arrears bucket, and then we're going to give you the opportunity to take some of that repayment here at a later date. So anytime we're going through the payroll process, if there are excess funds available and we see that there are some sufficient funds to be able to pay back some of this, we'll prompt you here on this step, give you a suggested amount, and then of course you can override that if you choose to do so. All right, and then finally the last step is reviewing the summary. So we have the ability to come in here and see kind of high level, does this line up with what we're expecting? Now, I kind of glazed over it as we were walking through the steps, but there's a reconciliation step. I could actually probably hop into it right here, where I could just do a comparison and see what's changed week over week. So, I can see big picture, here's our total hours. Last pay run, total hours are 410. So there's obviously some variance there. So we can drill in and kind of find that particular variance that we're looking for. Of course, the easiest thing is just to sort that. And we can say, okay, here it is, 10 hours reduced right here. So we could take a look at this and say, is this what we're expecting? Or, whatever that might be. So those things are going to be called out for you. However, you're still, of course, going to have an opportunity to come in here to review the summary and drill into any of these details before you commit the pay run. So you can even see like on the taxes, we can come in and say, okay, what are the specific taxes that are factoring in here? But then if we want to view the entire pay stub, this is a preview. So, this is something where, again, ultimately, you would have the ability to come in here and review all of these amounts. And then if you wanted to adjust any of these things, override any of these amounts entirely, you can do that. So, you can always make a final adjustment at the very end. And you'll notice down here at the bottom, it specifically says save and recalculate taxes. And so any edits that you made, you save those, it's going to recalculate everything on the fly. So it's very, very easy to make any kinds of adjustments. All right, and then once we submit this, it's going to take us to the post payroll screen. And what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time right here, I just went into one payroll that I completed earlier, and we can just take a look at this post payroll process. But we can see as we're guiding through this process here, this is going to be our checklist, essentially what we need to do after we've ran payroll, right? So first and foremost, hey, we got to get those employees paid. So those direct deposit employees, really straightforward. We're going to download that ACH file, send it to the bank, and then we're good to go on that. For any employees that are paid via a paper check, you have options. So if you want to print these yourselves, by all means, you can do that. You can print those paychecks directly from Greenshades online. However, if you choose to have Greenshades print and mail those pay stubs, we can do that as well. I'll say that I had the opportunity to run the team for a number of years that managed all this distribution process, and so we definitely have a lot of customers that take us up on this, because it especially seems that for many customers, not always across the board, but that number is kind of dwindling. Those number of employees that are still receiving those paper checks. Of course, pay cards are pretty common at this point. We have a lot of customers that utilize those. But for those employees that are still wanting to receive that paper check, it's really easy, especially as that volume goes down. It almost makes it harder sometimes, because you're like, okay, how are you distributing those, and are you going to bring in some additional help to come in once a week to do all those, printing those checks and managing all that, or are you just going to send it to Greenshades? So as it says right here with the distribute, you click distribute, and then you can select the option to have Greenshades print out and mail those checks for you. We can box and ship them to your location if most of your employees are physically there and you want to disperse that way. We can do that, or we can mail those directly to the employee's address, whatever you choose on that. So of course, all of our benefits are broken down here. All of our taxes are broken down. Now the taxes, of course, matter for a couple different reasons. On the GL side, of course, we're going to have all those taxes mapped back to respective accounts, so that when we post this and create the GL batch and send this back to Sage, that information will all be split out and allocated accurately. But then beyond that, of course, we need to get these taxes paid. And so this can all be done through the tax service in Greenshades. So we click pay taxes, and then it's opens up our tax service center right here, where you can see we have our to-do list of our tax returns that need to get submitted and our payments that need to get deposited. I always refer to this as sort of a kind of a hybrid approach between outsourcing your payroll taxes entirely versus doing your payroll taxes in-house, kind of on your own. This is, again, kind of a hybrid approach where we're going to build all these electronic returns for you, present all the information to you right here, give you the opportunity to view the totals, and then submit those. So we can file the returns. Those returns are going to be submitted by Greenshades directly to those tax agencies, the federal and the state level. And then with the payments, with the liability deposits, it works the same way. We can make those payments directly from Greenshades. One of the things that's kind of unique about this compared to other options when it comes to tax compliance outside of Greenshades is that with Greenshades, you can schedule this payment for a future date, and you can hold on to your funds for longer. So we will give you a date on when you need to submit that payment through Greenshades in order for us to kind of guarantee that that agency is going to receive it on time. We're very transparent and clear about that. It's typically 1 day in advance. So we'll give you a due date, and we say, hey, if it's due on the 28th, then great. You can come in here on the 28th, submit that, and know that that payment's going to go through on the 29th. Or you might come in here, let's say the payment's not due for another 2 weeks, but you just want to go ahead and mark it off your to-do list. You want to hold on to that cash, but you don't want it to be kind of an outstanding to-do in your mind. You can come in here and just schedule it for a future date. So if I click pay now, if this payment is due in advance or due in the future, we can say, hey, you know what, don't pay today on today's date. Go ahead and pay this 2 weeks from now or the day before it's due or something like that. And that gives you the chance to, you can have that control, see very clearly what's going on, but not have to do everything on your own, logging into various tax agency websites or going to your bank to request a file or something like that. All of that's done automatically for you. All you have to do is click the button. So again, kind of continuing on here with this post-payroll process, the last step that I wanted to mention, of course, is on the GL side. So with the general ledger, again, thinking back to when we first did this data source setup, right? We're already connected to the Sage environment. We know where this needs to go. Each environment is going to be, these settings are kind of done at a workspace level within Greenshades. So when we come in here and say, all right, let's go ahead and generate that batch and then ultimately submit that batch, that's going to allow us to know exactly where to post that to. And I didn't even mention it when we were going through the pay run process, but while we're actually going through payroll, before we finalize and post that payroll, you can see a preview of that general ledger. And so it's just going to say, hey, based on the setup that you have today, here's what the split's going to look like. Here's what your GL file is going to look like. And then that's an opportunity. If for some reason you saw something that wasn't what you were expecting, you can, of course, give us a call or just jump into your settings, take a look at how those are configured and make sure that that kind of lines up with what you're expecting. Okay, so got a couple screenshots I was going to note for back in Sage, but as we finish processing payroll, the next, of course, logical step, and then we'll be wrapping up here in just a moment, but the next logical step, of course, is to look at those actual pay stubs. So, of course, you have full visibility on the employer side to be able to come in here and, again, see precisely which checks were included in that check run. We can come in here and view a specific check or direct deposit or whatever it might be, and all this information is going to be visible to you. But in addition to being visible to you, this information is also visible to the employee. For all of our employees, when they're coming in here, of course, on their homepage, you may have noticed earlier, they can see their pay stub information directly on the homepage. Of course, they can receive text messages about this as well, or get an email alert. You can send them a PDF via email if you want. The system can auto-generate that and send out those emails. But the employee can have access to all the information directly in the employee portal. So if they're looking for a specific check, there's a lot of different kind of search parameters they can do here. Of course, they can download an entire PDF that has this if they need to try to get a loan and they need to hand this off to somebody. But if they're just wanting to quickly understand, hey, kind of what went on here, we have this breakdown for them here so they can see, okay, the bulk of it went to net wages, but we've got some taxes that we're taking out, and oh yeah, some deductions as well. So we can cruise down here and take a look specifically to see, what went into that. And then of course, the actual PDF itself can be downloaded as I'm doing right now. You can see on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. So that PDF can be viewed and downloaded for the employee to keep for their records. That was, a lot to jump through, just to not to recap on the whole thing, but just to recap on kind of that employee life cycle one more time, then we'll jump into any Q&A if we have time for that. What we went through today was, of course, talked a little bit about that employee onboarding process, but we talked some about the time and labor management, right? How the employees can enter in their time through Greenshades, what our different allocation options are for that, seeing that information feed into payroll. We talked a little bit about benefits enrollment, touched on this briefly, but again, open enrollment, qualifying life events, new hire enrollments, all that's done through benefits management, as well as Affordable Care Act compliance. So that's all built in. That came out, I think it was 2012, I think is when we released our ACA compliance dashboard for that. So that's been around for about a decade at this point. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then of course, after we're processing payroll and we get into the taxes, and I really kind of glazed over it, but on that tax piece, I talked some about, hey, after we process payroll, what it looks like to submit those taxes to the agencies in a seamless way through Greenshades. But what I didn't note was that those taxes and the rates and which employees this should be assigned to, that's all managed by Greenshades. So all you have to do is make sure that you have the home address correctly for the employee, and then we know which work location they're at. If they're a remote worker, you can just check the box for remote worker. If they work in multiple work locations, as you may have noticed, when I was going through on that employee's time card, I can select multiple work locations. So if an employee works in multiple work locations in the same pay period, that's not a problem. We're going to calculate all those taxes out per transaction. So we'll do all those allocations, we'll split everything out, and then ultimately, ensure that the appropriate dollar amount is taken out of the employee's paycheck, and then ultimately is, available to be reported to our tax agencies. All right, and so I touched on here a little bit, this is a screenshot here, but I went into this a little bit in our live environment. And so after we get into the post payroll, the part that I, just for the sake of time, didn't jump through today, is that after we process payroll, I kind of showed you where, okay, this is where you can review the general ledger. So we can take a look at our totals, make sure things line up, we'll submit that batch, and then that feeds directly down the web services into Sage, and we can come in here and we can see, okay, kind of the summary of these transactions, but then the scrolling down here, extending the screenshot a little bit, we can see all the details that are being loaded in here. So again, depending on kind of what level of information is collected within Greenshades, that's then going to feed back into the GL and on our journal entries that are created here within Sage. All right, so I know we only have a few minutes left. I went a little bit long talking through some different things. We did get some questions in advance of the webinar today, so I was trying to proactively address those. So I appreciate those of you who submitted some questions and interest in advance, so we could kind of try to proactively speak to those. Just looking at the time, I don't know if we have any questions or if we have enough time to answer some. But if anybody does have any questions, if you haven't already submitted, go ahead and put those questions in right now. And even if we don't have time to get to them today, we can absolutely follow up with you. And then again, as I noted earlier, by all means, trying not to go into too much detail in the discussion today. We do want to highlight, of course, the integration with Sage and the simplicity there, but didn't want to go into too much detail. But we're happy to do personalized one-on-one demonstration at any point. So if if you're interested in that, obviously just let us know. We'd be happy to schedule a follow-up with you.
So Chris, I'm just gonna jump in here real quick. Looks like I'll start with one question here. If we can get through it pretty quickly, maybe I'll throw a second one at you. If not, we'll kind of wrap it up. One that I pulled here was, is Greenshades a SaaS or purchased software?
Yeah, so we're SaaS, so we have monthly licensing that exists. We have a per employee per month licensing model, and then different different additional options from there. But yeah, we'd be considered SaaS.
Okay. And then one last one here we'll do since we got about a minute. Do you support a multi-entity structure?
Yeah, well, it could follow up to get more specifics, but yeah, generally speaking, the way that will work is that each of those entities, at least in terms of how we think about an entity, sometimes it's not always represented this way, but if that entity is a unique tax ID, then we're going to split that out into a separate environment. So when we are sitting here on Greenshades Online in the top left corner, I can navigate between my different entities here, my different companies. And so if there are multiple companies existing that are all processing payroll for employees, we'll split those into separate workspaces so that all of those taxes are split out separately, so they're reported to the government differently. But then there's opportunities to kind of bring that data back together at a later date, and you have kind of a cross company view as well, so you can be viewing information across all of the companies. But generally speaking, we're going to split those entities into separate workspaces if they're representing unique tax IDs. So hopefully that helped answer that. You may have been kind of thinking of something else entirely, and if so, happy to have a separate conversation about that. But typically that's the approach for that.
Well, that is all the time we have for you. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining the webinar, and hope you have an amazing rest of your day.